Hello, and welcome everybody to our second ever live show here at Chichester Fringe. We are Gaming the System, and we are a podcast of three intersectional feminists who like to talk about gaming and feminism and how they intersect. And I'm Alex. I've got Matt here with me.
Hello.
And I've got Jem as well.
Hi.
And I guess what we're going to kick off talking about is, why are we gamers? How do we get into gaming? Our gaming histories as such, just to give you a bit of context into who we are as gamers and the kinds of games that we're interested in. So I'll start off with you, Jem, if you'd like to share.
Okay, so I first started gaming when I was about 12, and it was on the ZX Spectrum, back in the days when you used to have to put an actual physical cassette into a tape recorder and wait for about half an hour for it to load. And then it would crash in the middle and you'd lose all your saves. It was horrible. So things have changed quite a lot since those days, and we've moved on into some amazing games and, you know, an amazing industry. So it's really fun to sit and chat with these two about all of this, the issues around gaming.
Fantastic. Matt, what about you?
So I think I pretty much came out of the womb gaming, because there are definitely videos of me in my nappy playing Hercules on PlayStation 1 on PlayStation, and that came out in 1994. And so that must have been at least a couple of years ago. I wore nappies for a while. And yeah, so it's been there from there on. Always been a PlayStation person. Always liked violent games, violence and puzzles. We were talking about genres recently, and violence and violent puzzles. That's me. But recently, Jem's lovely husband, Daniel, has gotten me into PC gaming, and that has breathed an entirely new life into it. And also, I'm officially a modder now. I've released two mods. So, and I have plans to make my own games. So, my gaming obsession isn't slowing down, and
Certainly
mixing
not.
it with feminism is just couldn't be a better way to talk about it, really.
Definitely. In terms of my own gaming history, pretty similar to both of you. I started gaming quite young. My formative memories being a Chichester local, going down to the butter market and market day on Saturdays, where it used to be an actual market, and you'd go in and find all the different stalls, and one of them was a gaming stall, and I would go in and kind of pick out different games, demos on CDs and all that sort of stuff. So kind of started out influenced by PC gaming. The biggest game that has had the most long-lasting impact was probably Tomb Raider. At the time, I was probably, or maybe 6 or 7, so probably a little too young to be gaming, playing such a game. But it's definitely been something that stuck with me. And from there, I got into PlayStation, just like Matt did, and have been going through PlayStation 1 all the way through to 5, and mainly game on consoles now, really. But yeah, always into pretty much most genres of game as well, except horror. The same thing with films. I can't do horror films. They just scare me too much. I have to have a support group around me if I'm going to do anything scary. So yeah, that's kind of where I got into gaming. And then, of course, all three of us, how did we meet? Well, we met during the pandemic, those terrible times, and decided to make something out of our shared passion for gaming and feminism.
Yeah, well, it was a friend of ours came to us and asked if we would be up for doing a one-off podcast as a or maybe even like a 24-hour gaming sort of marathon, which I think Matt's done in the past, and whether we'd do something like that to fundraise some money for another friend who was planning to stand in the London mayoral elections. So that was really what kicked it off, and then we thought, well, why don't we do a podcast just to raise awareness of this? So we got together and had a couple of chats, and we just enjoyed talking games so much that here we are 4 years later, still doing it. And we're really passionate about it, aren't we?
The initial thing I remember, because we're all members of the Women's Equality Party, which is the only women's rights-centred political party in the country, and just people who knew us there put us together to do, it was supposed to be a one-off fundraiser. And then Caroline, who's one of our original members, who stepped down a little while ago, she said the word podcast, and the three things, gaming, feminism, and podcast, they're my three most favourite things on the planet. So the second I heard that, I thought, yes, we absolutely must. And yeah, I did one 24-hour gaming fundraiser and never again, because gaming stops being fun after a certain point.
Yeah.
And yeah. So
even for you?
Even for me, yeah.
Wow.
Honestly.
Wow.
For a good cause, though.
Definitely, yeah. Fantastic. Well, I guess one of the questions we like to talk about a lot on the pod is, what has gaming got to do with feminism? Surely the two don't really go together. How does that work? So one of the things we like to do is explore where those two intersect. So what do you think is kind of the key aspects of that question, Matt, for you?
Yeah, one part comes to mind. We've got an adult audience, so we can talk about a bit more. This is a religious venue as well for something, so hopefully we won't do too much sacrilege. There's problems with stereotypes of women, particularly sexualization of women. And you think sexy women are fine, sexy people are fine, but there's a terrible issue with the way female characters behave and their voices sound. So you'll see a lot of, particularly games like Japanese RPGs and Asian games, where you've got this ridiculous, massive booed, massive ass stereotype of woman just because the male designers want something sexy, a sexy doll to play with, as Alex said. Yeah. But they have the most highest pitched girly voice of about someone who sounds like about they're 12, and there's a horrible, the way they're animated is women run like that, no matter how old they may be. And that sort of childification of women is just very, there's something wrong there. Yeah. And so that's one area that I've been worried about, particularly recently.
I think another big thing for me is just the stereotypes that surround gaming as a hobby. That it's stereotypically something that's sort of only teenage boys do it, and that's all who it's for. It's not for anybody else, but actually gaming is one of the biggest things out there. I think we looked at the figures in terms of the worth of gaming compared to like the film industry. Did you?
Yeah, it's about $445 billion this year, compared to around $79 billion of the movie industry. Yeah. And yet we talk about the movie industry a lot more mainstream than the games industry. And I think one of the things that we talk a lot about is as we say, how these things intersect, but also how games can be a force for positive reinforcement and positive behavior, or can reinforce negative stereotypes, negative behavior, or things, that whatever way you look at it, it's a very strong and powerful industry. And currently, there's very few people holding it to account. There's very few people looking at what it does and why it does it. And when you think that children, I started my gaming journey when I was 12. That was only because computers weren't around before then, and you started when you were 2, and you were saying about 6.
Yeah, about 6.
Yeah, so, all of us started gaming very young. Those are very informative years, and the sorts of information that we're feeding into people at that age, it really matters. And I suppose what we try and do on our podcast is to raise those topics, is just to discuss them. We don't have necessarily answers, but we do think that they need to be taken more seriously. And I think, that when you look at the amount of money that, that these markets, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
And with children, the difference between when we were gaming, the amount of games has grown exponentially, and it's going even more. The industry is growing exponentially, and it's not going to slow down. And children these days, they have a far wider like slew of games to play with. And if parents aren't gamers, it's very, very difficult to relate to the world that their children live in, because gaming is it's not just a hobby, it's a real massive pillar in people's lives. And we didn't have social media, it was just us. We'd occasionally have a magazine with a disc in it,
Yes,
an actual
a
disc demo
disc.
in it,
Yes.
which was incredible. So that was fairly easy to keep track of, even though I was playing my first, like in 2005, I played the first God of War game, and it changed my life, because yes, I get to be a violent lunatic, and so that does that for me. Whereas now, there's also social media on top of it, and YouTube and Twitch, and there's a lot more ways to spend money in games now. And
online games, so kids who are playing games are interacting with other people, which is, definitely isn't a negative thing. My husband and I met online, so I do think it's quite positive in some cases, but it needs an awareness from the parents. I have a 16-year-old daughter, and loves her gaming, and even as relatively sort of hardcore gamer, I still find it difficult to understand the world that she is now experiencing in those online spaces. And I think, that what the impact of games is significant. I think that's one thing that I think is we want to get across in our show. And then within that, there are lots of different aspects within it, aren't there? There's all sorts of different areas that we tend to look at.
Yeah, I like to think of gaming, like, obviously is very social now, especially with things like online gaming as well. There is a social aspect to it, because you can be part of a team in a battle and talking to each other and asking for help, or you can be working as a team or of two in a co-op game. That is a very social aspect to it. Or it's just maybe even you've got a group of friends who you only know through gaming as well. There's all sorts of elements there, and I think particularly during the pandemic, that social aspect of gaming really exploded. So many people were buying things like, it's gone out of my head now.
Animal Crossing.
That's it, Animal Crossing, yes. That was, I think, one of the most popular games of 2020.
I celebrated New Year on Animal Crossing with my little peoples doing fireworks, and I was there with them.
And there's definitely been a rise in all sorts of different types of gaming to reflect what we want out of gaming as well. Cozy gaming is something that's really become more and more popular in the last few years. It's the kind of gaming that you can just chill out, spend time. Like Animal Crossing, I would describe as a cozy game. You can just go and chat with your friends, or go and grow vegetables on your farm, or go fishing. There's no killing people, there's no blood, no violence. Yes, I love a bit of blood and violence too. I enjoy those types of games as well. But sometimes you just want to chill. So there's plenty
and
of
some people chill with blood and violence.
They do, yes. Yeah, it's definitely an outlet for if you've got lots of pent-up emotions, you want to go and punch something. Instead of physically going and punching something, you can digitally go and punch something instead, which is also equally satisfying. Yes. So there's plenty of different options out there.
You made it sound like you've punched people in the face. And
Not people, no, just cushions. Cushions are my limit, I think.
And your sister with a...
Oh.
Didn't you hit her with a stick of some sort?
At some point, when I was very little. Yes. That might have been that one time. But we don't talk about it.
We don't talk about it.
No. That was the past Alex. Present Alex is much better. So, yes. But yeah, in fact, while we talk about sibling rivalry, games are also very competitive, and growing up in a family that enjoys competitive gaming, we often talk about gaming as video games, but we can also obviously cover gaming in the wider sense, things like board games. Everybody at some point will have played a card game, a board game with their family. It's a very sort of, it's a traditional thing to do with your family at times of celebration, things like Christmas particularly. And we do discuss the elements of gaming where it just feels like a very sort of that social aspect where you're bonding with others who are around you. Sometimes it can go a little bit too far if you get too competitive, like my family, and it ends up being a massive argument, and then nobody talks for half an hour afterwards. So yeah, that element of gaming is also something that I really enjoy, and I think when you grow up in that environment, naturally gaming is appealing to you as an activity. So yeah.
I would say that one of the things about the gaming is obviously that it's fun and it's entertainment and it's enjoyable. And one of the factors of the entertainment is that it can subtly influence our opinions and our views without us even really realizing it. Comedy is quite well known for that, in that in making something a joke can normalize opinions that might otherwise be unacceptable or might otherwise be seen as extreme, and play is one of those sort of factors. And so obviously playing games can be a huge amount of fun, and or it can be a stress relief or a way to bond between people. But if the imagery within those games is not properly considered, then that can reinforce sort of gender stereotypes that we might want to move away from. It can reinforce violence against women and girls. It can create a sort of normalizing of behaviours that perhaps are not so desirable in society. And we talked earlier about sort of the infantilization of women, and there's definitely a hypersexualization of women within the games world, and I think what that does is put up barriers for women who want to game, because it's not always fun to only be able to see yourself on the screen in, you know, skimpy clothes or having to be rescued by a male character all the time. And so we talk a lot about that, don't we? And we've talked a lot about the games that do it right and the games that do it wrong and the games that are kind of working their way towards that. Did you have anything that you wanted to say about that, Matt?
Yeah, the barriers and stereotypes we talk about a lot about capitalism as well, because capitalism is the hidden hand behind everything that it shoots itself in the foot, because what capital is it wants to make as much money as possible, and what you want is as many people as possible playing games. And if on online forums, most women don't play with their microphone on, because the second they speak, loads of people come on and go, "Oh, it's a girl playing games." The kind of thinking, that's the kind of behaviour that seeing these stereotypes leads to. So one, if you want as many people gaming as possible, so you don't want the stereotype to be, "Oh, we're not going to make a game in a certain way because women won't play it." Everyone's going to play it, and it just puts up unnecessary barriers. And yeah, it's that kind of, when you only see, so I'm a white guy, when you only see white men in everything, you think that that's normal. You think that, oh yeah, you see white men in only games, only TV, only news, only movies. And then, to be honest, I'm sick of it. You get a bit bored of seeing yourself the entire time. Whereas now, as diversity is starting to grow, the richness of that is insane. It's not just about, ticking boxes of diversity and inclusion. It's about experiencing other things that aren't you. And also, the biggest difference with gaming is that you actually get to live that person's life as you go through it, and you experience things in a different way. And that's so much more interesting.
That's one of the things I really love about gaming, is the power it has, that it's so interactive. It's not like watching a film or a TV. You're actually an active participant in the story. You are making the story happen. And in some games you can choose the way the story goes. You have that power to decide that. And it's an excellent form of escapism as well. If you want to be an astronaut, you can. If you want to be a football player, you can. If you want to be an adventurer, or even a puzzle solver, or even a cat, you can be a cat. There's all sorts out there for whatever you want to do, and that's a really powerful thing that I love about gaming as well. Another thing I want to touch on as well is gaming should be for everyone, and sometimes there are other barriers in the way of gaming, like accessibility, for example. If you have 2 hands with working fingers, you can probably play most games pretty well. But if you don't have that, you're going to need adaptions and different ways to play and to interact with games on a different level. And we've seen a lot of pushes in that direction from developers and game designers and game tech companies that are making all these adaptions possible. But there's still quite a lot of barriers for disabled gamers. Myself, I have cerebral palsy, so my hands can get quite fatigued when I have a lot of button pressing to do and a lot of button mashing in a short period of time. And there's lots of ways you can get around that. So in some games, you can have accessibility settings where you can change the controls to hold the button instead of tapping it constantly. All sorts of different workarounds there. And the options for that have grown so much in the time that since I've started gaming to now, which is really positive to see, but I think it should be, like just a given across the board. That's what you find in most games nowadays.
And again, accessibility comes down to barriers.
Definitely.
Because if someone can't play something, a lot of it comes down to the ego of creators who go, but it's my artistic vision. It's my artistic vision. I can't possibly compromise my artistic vision for accessibility reasons. And then we had a blind gamer called Ross who works at the Royal National Institute for Blind People. And he said, it doesn't matter how awesome your game is, if I can't play it, what's the point?
Yeah.
And then bring it down to, it's a creative challenge. They seem to not recognize the creative opportunities to go, right, we're going to take this game and we're going to make it the most accessible game possible without it detracting from the quality of the game. For example, the latest God of War game, and if you've seen the Last of Us TV show, the games of that, the remakes of that, they're the only ones that have properly thought of everything, almost everything in terms of accessibility. And most of it it's not difficult to implement. It really isn't, especially when you're a professional game designer. You can change the size of menus, you can change the size of subtitles. And people find, oh yeah, I actually enjoy playing the game with, for example, subtitles. Subtitles are the most obvious one possible that everything has everywhere and it's normal. And as we say, anyone can acquire a disability at any time. You might get in a car accident and then all of a sudden you might be paralyzed on one side and you need to play with one hand. And game designers should go, okay, how do we make this workable with one hand? And there's a way to do it.
Yeah, I wasn't there when Ross came on, but I listened to the show afterwards, and I was really struck because he was talking about how he had always had to have somebody else help him game because of his disability, and that games weren't catering to that. And subsequently, when he played, it was Last of Us, wasn't it? When he played Last of Us, it was the first time that he had been able to play a game through by himself without having to get somebody else to come and help him. And I think when you hear somebody talking like that, then you realize the power that these people have, that the game designers have, that to make somebody's life that little bit better with actually relatively little consideration. And I think one of the things that we cover a huge amount is that lack of diversity in the games industry is what leads to lack of diversity within games. So because there aren't so many people coming from different backgrounds, they don't necessarily even think about it. It's not deliberate exclusion, I think, of people. It's just not thinking about it. I didn't think about a lot of the disabilities and how they can impact on your gaming experience until we started doing this podcast, and I've learned so much about that and so much about how how easy it is to make things accessible and therefore not othering people who need those changes, to just build it into the way that our world works.
And you might think that what does accessibility have to do with feminism and capitalism have to do with feminism? That's why we're intersectional feminists, because all of these things, they cross each other. Because if you've got a disabled woman and a disabled man, their experiences of accessibility are going to be different, but they all overlap. There's no feminism. We're not feminists and screw everyone else. We're feminists that say, yeah, accessibility matters, capitalism matters. We're 180 episodes in, and it's impossible to only talk about like women in games. And that would, again, diversity of conversation. So much more interesting.
Yeah.